What's going on, fantasy football fans? I'm your host, Hussein the Brain, and you're watching The Couch. It's week 13 of fantasy football. This past week in the NFL, ODB made one of the sickest catches ever in the history of the league. Robert Griffin III got his soul crushed by the 49ers defense, and the Bills stomped the Jets in a Monday Night Football game in Detroit. I have an amazing video for you guys this week. First, I'm going to start off with some of my personal strategies and analysis that I use for each position. Then we're going to head over to Twitter, answer the Twitter question of the week, reveal my waivers, and then I have a question for you guys at the end. Next year, The Couch will be providing content for you guys that play daily and weekly leagues. And I know you like that. For each position, I'm going to tell you the top stats that directly affects fantasy football points. These have nothing to do with emotions, what you like, what I like. It's a straight stats analysis. Let's start off with the most consistent position in fantasy football, the quarterback. The number one stat that directly affects a quarterback's fantasy points is the passing touchdowns per game. And the number two stat will be passing yards per game. These are the two most important stats that you want to look at when selecting a quarterback. To help you determine those stats, if you want to take it a step further, you want to look at, is the quarterback on a good team? Do they have a lot of red zone appearances? When they do get in the red zone, do they like to pass or do they like to run? A sexy stat that people like to look at is a quarterback's rushing stats. This has very little fantasy value. Other than Russell Wilson, if you pick someone like Cam Newton or RG3, look what's happening to their fantasy points. This is not a statistic that's too important when it comes to fantasy. Now, it's a little bit different for running backs, another consistent position. The number one stat that affects fantasy points the most for running backs is yards per game. The number two stat is touchdowns per game. That's obvious for being the top two stats. But number three is very important. Take notice to this, is snaps per game. The more snaps a running back is in, the more fantasy points he gets. Touchdowns are very important for running backs, obviously. When picking a running back, ask yourself, is he on a good team? Does this team have a lot of red zone appearances? And when they do get in the red zone, do they get red zone snaps? Contrary to belief, big playability does not play a huge role in affecting fantasy points when you look at the big picture. CJ Tukey and CJ Spiller both are perfect examples of this. Guys who are not necessarily red zone running backs, but do have that big playability. Almost all touchdowns for running backs are scored in the red zone within the 20-yard line. For wide receivers, the number one stat that directly affects fantasy points is receiving yards per game. And number two, the most important stat is targets per game. Look at, targets are so important. Look at that. You don't get any fantasy points for when a wide receiver is target, but yet it's number two in direct correlation to fantasy points. Josh Gordon in his first game back led the league in targets for week 12. And trust me, that's going to be a great sign for Gordon for things to come the rest of the season. If you want to get more intricate when deciding which wide receiver to start, look at the wide receiver's height and look at the potential DB that's going to be guarding him. Look at the DB's height as well. Now, straight statistically speaking, we're getting into more inconsistent positions. Wide receivers are much more inconsistent than running backs, and tight ends are even more inconsistent than wide receivers. Now, the breakdown for tight ends is very similar to the wideout position. Receptions per game is very important, but what separates a tight end from the wide receiver is red zone targets. A combination of being targeted in between the 20s and also being a red zone threat is the ideal tight end, and that's why there's not too many elite ones out there. Also, a tip for you guys, don't be fooled by the opponent's rank versus a tight end. One of the first things I do when I see a great matchup is I look at which tight ends they faced. If they face Gronkowski and Jimmy Graham, then their statistics are probably going to be much worse against the tight end position. Each tight end matchup, it should be a case-by-case scenario, and it's really hard to predict these because, like I said, tight end is a very inconsistent position. And of course, the most inconsistent positions are defenses and kickers. Kickers being the absolute most inconsistent when it comes to week-to-week performance and season-to-season performance. Three other factors that help me determine who to start week to week are the weather, playing conditions. That's the third most important. Then I head over to the sport betting lines. The second most important thing would be the point spread. And the first most important thing I like to look at is the over-under. Good weather conditions and domes, those are obviously better for passing stats and kicking stats. when you look at the point spread, that helps determine which defense would be better. Would it be a blowout on which side? But I don't read too much into that because sometimes it's skewed based on perception. Remember, they're trying to get people to bet one way or the other. But the most important stat I like to look at is the over-under. Will a game be a low-scoring game or a high-scoring game? And these are usually very accurate, so make sure you look at that when determining on who to start. This player, that player, make sure you look at the over-under. The over and under will help you determine if it's a high-scoring game. That means a lot of big passes being thrown, maybe some less rush attempts. Maybe won't be a good defense to pick in that game. A low-scoring game, that might be a lot of rushing attempts, and that might be a good game where you select a team defense based on a weekly matchup. I hope that wasn't too confusing for you guys. You can always hit me up if you have any questions or want to talk more about strategies and who to pick week to week. You can click right here for some of the links, resources that I use. If you're on a computer, you can click that. Or better yet, in the description below, I'll provide a link with all the links to the resources that I use for weather, betting lines, and also to subscribe to my VIP waiver wireless, so you'll get my waivers before the video comes out, so you'll be the first to get the waiver list. Hope it didn't confuse you too much with all those strategies. You know, you can always hit me up with a YouTube comment or on social media, and we can talk more about strategies and who to start week to week. Let's go to Twitterland and see what questions we have this week. This week, we're going to run through 5 Twitter questions. If you want your week 14 or rest of the season question answered on the next video, make sure you use the hashtag AskTheBrain. Joe asks, should I drop Mike Wallace for Jarvis Landry? Oh man, you want to start off with a tough question here. Okay, I really wouldn't want to drop Mike Wallace. I still think he's a great wide receiver 3 or flex in some deeper leagues, but you know, if he's your worst player, then I would do this. Jarvis Landry is a must pick up in most leagues. And as you can see, the past 3 weeks, Jarvis Landry got 26 targets and Mike Wallace only 20. So if Wallace is your worst player, do this and pick up Landry. And Tony, he's been following, I know this guy, he's been following the couch for over 3 years now. Thanks for that, bro. Appreciate the support. He asks, thanks for Fantasy Couch for telling me to pick up Odell Beckham Jr. Hashtag AskTheBrain. Okay, that's not a question, but you're very welcome. Next question. Mike asks, Rudolph or Kelsey rest of the season? Rudolph was a guy that was ranked pretty high on my tight end rankings for the draft and pretty high on all the other rankings that I've seen. But right now, he's really unproven commodity. I really like Kelsey. You know, the Chiefs don't use the wide receiver position that much. No wide receiver has a touchdown this year on the Chiefs. I'm sure you've heard that stat plenty of times. So you got to go with Kelsey here. Go Kelsey, not Rudolph. Team Savages has a lineup question here. He's in a PPR league with 12 teams. He's got starting right now Dez, Marshall, Antonio Brown, and Jordy. He's asking, should I sub in LaFell for one of these guys? Let's go over your starters real quick. So you got Dez Bryant. He's the wide receiver with possibly the most upside in fantasy football. You can't bench him. Antonio Brown, the most elite wide receiver possibly in fantasy football. You can never bench him. And then you got Jordy Nelson and A-Rod. You never can doubt those two. They got a tough matchup, but I'm never going to sit Jordy Nelson. Now, Brandon Marshall's the only guy I'm going to consider sitting. So I would not do this, but keep tabs on that injury. It seems that it could affect him, and he has an early game. So keep a close watch on that. If it seems like he's not practicing and he's going to be affected by that injury, that's the only guy I would sub in LaFell for. But, you know, I probably wouldn't do this. So just keep tabs on the injury and keep the team how it is. You got the lineup right. And Justin asks, I own the Colts D. Should I pick up the Giants playing the Jags or Rams against the Raiders? You know, it's real tough to pick between these three, but I'm definitely going with the Rams defense. Now, they're facing a quarterback, Derek Carr, who doesn't get sacked a lot, but I think this is going to be a good game for that defense. And if they can get a few sacks, they will definitely score the highest amount of fantasy points for you. So I'm going with the Rams, and then right behind them is the Colts, and then we got this Giants-Jaguars game, which is really hard to predict. So it's definitely between the Rams and the Colts. I'd go with the Rams. Now let's go into the waivers. Quick reminder, there are no more bye weeks for the rest of the season. I ranked last week's top waiver wire pickups. CJ Anderson is ranked number 1, and that should be obvious for you guys. Daniel Herron is basically the starter for the Colts at the moment. He's behind T. Rich, and that's not too much competition. Now, Latavius Murray, I may have ranked him even higher, but he does have a concussion, so he's number 3. If he's healthy and the upside is there, so much for this guy. He could be ranked right behind CJ Anderson. All he needs to do is start getting more snaps, and that could very well happen real soon on that Raiders team. And you got Tannehill, Landry, Kenny Stills. Those 3 are must pickups in most leagues. And a couple guys with upside is Charles Johnson. We see him getting a lot of targets over there. And, I don't know what's going to happen for the rest of the season, but this guy could be one of the best wide receivers on that Vikings team. And if you need a tight end, you got Kyle Rudolph. And this week's top ads, we got Vernon Davis at the top of the list. Not a guy you want to start right away, but definitely a guy who's being dropped recently and is great as a tight end stash. If your tight end gets hurt and Vernon Davis starts doing better, you're going to be in a good situation for the fantasy playoffs. So he's a good stash. If you guys have, if you're in a league with a deep bench, then you got Anthony Dixon, a guy that Buffalo seems to like and could be right behind Fred Jackson on that depth chart. Robert Woods could yet again be another sneaky start. If Joe Hayden guards Sammy Watkins, then Robert Woods should have a big game. LeGarrette Blount, I have no idea what's going on there in New England, but LeGarrette Blount, I see him being more of the trustworthy running back over there in New England when it comes to the red zone. So, that's definitely a guy that needs to be picked up. Tough to start Patriots running back, though, with the Bellatrix going on. I like Pierre Thomas in a PPR league. I like Andre Williams in non-PPR leagues. Stedman Bailey, I don't know why. This seems hilarious, but he could be basically like a number 2 wide receiver on the Rams. So that's definitely a good pickup in deeper leagues. And we're onto the deeper pickups right now. So Stedman Bailey's the top of the deep league pickups. Benjamin Cunningham, he's also number 2 running back on the Rams. So that's a good pickup. John Brown, worth looking at if Larry Fitzgerald is hurt. I would rank him even higher if we knew that Larry Fitzgerald's going to miss week 13. Dante Moncrief could be a good stash. And also Drew Stanton, not a good quarterback, but he has a good matchup this week if you're in a dual quarterback league. For my top 6 defenses for this week, I have the Rams going against the Raiders. Like I said before on the Twitter question of the week, hopefully they can get some sacks, and they will be a great defense this week if they can accomplish that. And Ryan Mallett, if you owned him, he was actually owned in 5% of leagues. You can feel free to drop him. He is out for the rest of the season. And I have a question for you. Coach Bill Belichick, the inventor of Bellatrix, hates your fantasy football team, if you didn't already know that. Which running back on the Patriots will score the most points for week 13? I want to see what you guys think. Leave a comment below on the YouTube comments, and I'll let you know what I think. I'll take a guess. That's all the time we have for this week. Make sure you guys subscribe to the YouTube channel. Again, there's a link below with some resources and also a link to subscribe to my VIP waiver wire list. New video every Tuesday. I'll see you guys on the next one.